Okay.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes, but would you say a few words about yourself?
Yes,
Just
sure. So,
2 or 3 sentences.
Yeah, my name is Borbála Klacsmann, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher at the University College Dublin in a project entitled When Nationalism Fails, a comparative analysis of Holocaust museums. And I've been dealing with the Holocaust for 16 years already in various projects and institutions. So this topic that I will be talking about was part of my doctoral research. And basically it was the only part of it which dealt with gender. So this is what I am going to talk about, the compensation claims of Holocaust survivors in Hungary. So I will just briefly talk a bit about the historical background, because I don't know if people are familiar with the Holocaust in Hungary. So on the 19th of March in 1944, Germany occupied Hungary due to complex diplomatic and political reasons. And the new government was appointed, the government of Demes, who obliged Jews to put a yellow star on their clothes from the 5th of April. And then the ghettoization started from mid-April. All properties were confiscated. And between mid-May and the 8th of July, approximately 440,000 Hungarian Jews were deported, mainly to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And after the war, there was a previously unknown social problem, the reintegration of approximately 200,000 destitute Holocaust survivors into society, most of whom had lost their properties and had no social network. And the first step was, of course, the creation of an inclusive legal background and making restitution possible. However, unfortunately, restitution of Jewish property was downplayed by the government. And as I had mentioned before, most of the Aryanized property had been redistributed to non-Jews in need, and it was really hard to get it back. And the post-war economic circumstances also did not allow financial aid operation. And of course, political will was also lacking, because most politicians were afraid that restitution would incite anti-Semitism. Therefore, the Hungarian Jews relied mostly on international self-aid organizations, for instance, the Red Cross, the Joint, and the World Jewish Congress. During the socialist period, restitution was mostly withheld, and there was no talk of compensation either. However, in the 1960s, in the framework of the German laws concerning restitution for Holocaust survivors, the Federal Republic of Germany paid compensation to the victims of Nazi medical experiments, also in certain communist countries, including Hungary. This was considered a diplomatic success, actually, in Hungary. And the mediation was done by the Red Cross and the National Committee of Persons Persecuted by Nazism. I will use the short form you can see on the slide, which is NUB. And they helped the survivors to submit their applications in this compensation program. So you can see one page here on the slide from the form which the survivors had to fill out. And this form contained questions about the current life situation of the survivors, the experiences during the Holocaust, plus they had to give protocols or testimonies with their own words, and the claimants were cross-examined. And their testimonies mostly focused on specific problems, adjusted to make the claim more justified and therefore to have a bigger chance of getting compensation. Sometimes there were things omitted or overemphasized or altered in the testimonies, and I will talk a bit more about this later. These people, of course, had to talk about very painful and humiliating experiences in front of strangers, and we also have to take into consideration that 20 years had passed, so some of the memories must have been blurred already. I investigated first and foremost cases from Pest-Pilis-Solt-Kiskun County, which is the central county around Budapest in Hungary. And I found that most of these testimonies and applications were handed in by women. So out of 42 cases, 38 were women applicants. And therefore, of course, it needed a gendered examination, this whole case. Sorry. Yes, and my research questions were mainly which kind of experiences and types of interpretations the survivors found necessary to and useful to get the compensations and why, and whether these narratives led to success, or if not, why was the claim dismissed. And since we have a limited time, I kept only 2 cases in this PowerPoint. Maybe I won't even have time for the second one, but even the first one, you will see what I was talking about when I meant that the narratives were adjusted. So my first case is that of Magda V. She was born in Pest-Szentendrei in 1925. Her parents had a glass and porcelainware shop, and they invested all of their money in merchandise. The family was deported in July 1944, while Magda and her younger sister Clara stayed in Pest-Erzsébet to work in a factory. And in December, they were also deported to Ravensbrück. In the camp, there were medical experiments conducted by Dr. Karl Gebhardt, and the 2 girls were also experimented on here. Later on, they were taken to other camps, and finally they were liberated in Theresienstadt in May 1945. When they arrived back home, they found that their house had been looted, everything was lost, and all of their family members died. And they also had to be hospitalized due to their health issues. Later on, Magda's cousin arranged for Magda to marry Jenő R., who was a middle-aged Orthodox Jewish man, because the 2 girls couldn't maintain themselves. Of course, they were very young. And unfortunately, this marriage embittered Magda's life, as her husband abused her physically, and later on they separated and got divorced. Another marriage was in 1956, this time to Endre V., and unfortunately this man also left Magda the next year. And now I will compare 2 types of sources. One of them is Magda's compensation claim from 1964, and the other one is her Visual History Archive interview, which was conducted in 2001. So in her compensation claim, she writes, or she stated in her testimony that she could start working only in 1949. Until then, her husband maintained her. They lived together for 3.5 years. When it became sure that Mrs. V could not have children, her husband divorced. In the interview, she states, "Even though I knew that I was doing a spiritual mesalliance, I had no other choice. There was my sister, who also did not work. We had to make a living somehow. When in his jealousy, for which he had no reason, he started to beat me up," meaning her husband, of course. In our family, our parents did not even have a loud word. I had medical certificates of wounds healing over 8 days. My hair was torn out. My toes were black as he stepped on them with boots. And then with 3 dresses, I moved to our washing kitchen, and there I lived for 3.5 years. So this marriage was not about having children, of course, but about an abusive husband. And obviously it ended with a divorce. In the compensation claim, there is an excerpt about another relationship where she was strongly involved emotionally, which also ended because of her health and infertility. She did not talk about this at all in her interview. And then another excerpt, she got married again in the summer of 1956, but her husband left her in the beginning of 1957 as nothing bound him to her, meaning that they couldn't have children.
Borbála, you have 1 more minute left, okay?
Okay. The fact that married life goes with strong pain also contributed to the dissolution of the two marriages and the relationship. And this is what she states in her interview. My second marriage wasn't successful either. I lived with the husband for 6 months, and on 31st December 1956, we still had fun together. Then he left on the 1st of January, and for 3 months, he did not get in touch even via letters. He did it deliberately. He used to say that we should leave, but I always said that I wanted to stay with my sister. So he never asked me whether I wanted to emigrate. Okay, I will leave the last, these two case. And so I think I could demonstrate even with this one case that there were omitted things in the testimonies. Probably they were either too personal or she did not think they were relevant for her interview. And in the end, she actually received 40,000 marks, which was a huge sum at the time. And I will come to my conclusion that, as I mentioned, some of the details in these testimonies in the compensation claims were modified or altered or even left out in order to justify the claim. The results of the experiments were overemphasized, and events which were not closely connected were attributed to the experiment and its result. And the circumstances in the camps were depicted sometimes much worse than they actually were. And we have to also emphasize that many Hungarian Holocaust survivors did not get restitution or compensation at all after the war. Some of them felt entitled to the compensation provided by West Germany, even if they had not gone through any medical experiments, because I have also found such cases during my research. And since Andrea asked about the education, I added a couple of sentences to the very end of my slide. So I think these sources are very good for teaching about source analysis in the first place, like the limitations and the advantages of historical sources. Of course, about Jewish women's
double... we have to finish.
Okay, yeah. Double vulnerability and approaching sensitive and traumatic topics. Thank you for your attention.